Thanks everybody for having me here today. I feel quite an honor and privilege, and actually kind of intimidating, to be honest with you. I'm not really sure. I wasn't really sure what you would want to hear. So I'm basically going to share, I guess, my own personal story, and then you can see how that might apply to your own situation. And because I always say, you could look at a lot of other successful people and try to mimic what they do. But not necessarily everything that they do applies to you and applies to your situation. As they say, there are different ways of skinning the cat, for sure. But I think there's some general basic rules of thumb that you could generally go by, and I can kind of touch on that I think are very important, and is probably a common denominator amongst most entrepreneurs. So. My aspiration started right from high school. I remember being in my the guidance counselor's office and asking if I can graduate in January of my grade 13 year for the OACs, and he was jokingly saying, well, you can graduate at the end of grade 12 if you get all your credits. And I said, oh, okay, how can I? And so I just went through and I started from there, and I figured the sooner I can quit school, the sooner I could start making money and saving money. I was living at home. I didn't think I'd ever have a better opportunity to save than when you're at home, and I started working and saving. So I kind of accelerated out. I was able to graduate at about 2 years earlier, just by not necessarily doing better in my courses, but kind of arranging them in such a way that, I went to Lake State. I was there on the scholarship, and they gave me credit for my first year, so I went from grade 12 right into second year. By the time my friends graduated high school, I was in third year. But again, I don't think that I wasn't any smarter than anybody else academically, but I just was ambitious, and I was driven, and I worked hard, and that's really all that was. So I did my university. I graduated in '92. December of '91, I remember, I started pounding the pavement looking for a job. And I remember walking into places and saying, what do you want to do? And I said, well, what do you want me to do? And I had no idea what I was doing or whatever. I just wanted a job. I wanted to start making money. So that was December '91, and I got hired for September 1st, '92. So 9 months ahead, I knew I had a job. And I pursued my CA designation as a chartered accountant. And '94, I wrote my exams. In '95, I started real estate. And I was doing real estate on the side, along with my brother Dave, who was a contractor. So I was working in the office during the day in a salary position. Wasn't really making anything to brag about. My starting salary, I think, was $21,000 in the early '90s. And I was dating a girl who's now my wife. And I went to the bank. All the banks turned me down. And the only ones who looked at me were the two credit unions at the time, Askew, now Community First, and Northern Credit Union. And I went down there, and they even more or less laughed at what I was making. And so I went to my girlfriend, and I had her come down with me, and she took her daycare wages and signed some papers with me. And our two incomes combined was still nothing to brag about, but it was enough to satisfy the bank, and we built a fourplex together. And so the intention was we would keep one unit, and when we got married, we were going to move into it, so we're both still kind of living at home. And filled up quick. I went to the bank and I said, I'm going to build another one. I'm going to live in that one. And I kept telling them I'm going to live in this one. They gave me more financing if I was going to live in it. So I just, I'm going to live in it. And it got rented up. And I just kind of kept going with that. It was mid '90s. People thought it was crazy. Algoma Steel was in rough shape. People were leaving the Sioux. I think the same kind of brain drain that we have perhaps now. It was the same story 20 years ago, but it was something I wanted. It was something that I was confident in. I know that by living there and kind of being my own superintendent and cleaning and painting and everything else, that I could make it work. The first 3 years were very stressful, a lot of stressful nights. I was managing it all I had no line of credit because I had nothing to give as security, but I had a $5,000 overdraft protection that I think they'll give to students. And I was running the rentals with that as my cushion. But I was getting notices, and every time I got a notice, it ruined my day because I would be nervous about getting it rented and everything else. So I went through that over the next 3 years. Still looking at, kind of the next real estate deal with my brother. By 99, interest rates started to come down, and I remember paying out a penalty to get out of my mortgages, which were a bit higher, and I refinanced everything and was able to secure a line of credit, and that was kind of my breathing room to start doing things. So it was a slow start, but it was a grind, but a little bit at a time. Your places are kind of paying themselves down, and now you have equity to go to the bank with, and they gave me a line of credit to work out of. And every year or two, I go back to them, and I get the credit, the line of credit increased, and just kind of kept going from there. Maybe as I go along, if anybody has any questions, they might be fresh in your mind as I'm going. So feel free to ask any questions as I go along. I might ramble a bit and stuff, but I want to try to keep it informal. And again, I'm just looking at this as sharing my own personal story. So if there's no other questions, so that's that part of it. I continued working under a salaried position, which was kind of tough in itself because I didn't have the flexibility of being self-employed. So when I needed to get stuff done during the day, I was always juggling, right? In 2000 or 2001, then a fellow Rotarian of mine, Alex Calum, we got talking, and he was a sole proprietor. We got talking, and I bought into his practice. And so then I was completely self-employed. And then from there, we just kind of grew the practice together. He was a little bit further along in his career, so he didn't really have the drive to grow. He was kind of happy with the status quo, but I want to grow. So it was a nice win-win situation. He got to kind of enjoy some of that energy and growth. And we grew the practice together. In 2009, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Not that a lot didn't happen in between, but in 2009 there was an opportunity to buy the Great Northern Hotel, as it was called, the old Ramada Inn, as most people know it by, and it was a pretty rundown property. We ended up buying it with my brother, a childhood friend of mine, and a fourth guy. So we bought it together, and I moved my office there, and I went completely on my own. And then I just continued growing the practice from there. So that kind of, in a nutshell, is where I am today. But it was kind of every year. It was a project. It was a certain deal, and it was one deal at a time. It was one client at a time in terms of my accounting practice, and it was one deal at a time on the real estate side. And so now I look back 20 years. And it just, here you are. You look back and you're like, how did that all happen? And well, it just happened a little bit at a time, and it really adds up. I like to give some advice in terms of some general rules of thumb. Like I said, what certain people do or what drives them doesn't necessarily drive everybody. One of the things that I think is important is really what motivates you. And you got to look at the big picture. So if you become, for example, someday, if your only motivation is becoming financially successful someday, well then you're not going to be really satisfied with that at the end of the day. It's being involved with the community, I think, that has to be an integral part of that. And if it's not, then you're going to be, in your older years, yeah, you might be successful in your business and what you've done, but you're not going to feel a real sense of accomplishment. I remember reading on this one sign outside of a prenatal area of the hospital, said 100 years after you die, nobody's going to remember how much money you had in your bank account. But what people will remember is the impact that you had in the community. So being successful in business only gives you a tool to be successful in life, as far as I'm concerned. If you don't use that tool, it doesn't really mean anything. Now, that might not apply to you. You might disagree, perhaps. But that's my philosophy. I see a lot of people that are financially successful, but they're bored and they don't know what to do with themselves. When they're retired, they don't have any hobbies. They might not even have any real friends. And so they have to kind of keep working. They think what drives them is that next deal, but it never does. Then they just need the next one, and they just have to kind of keep going. So I think that's a real important thing. And you can do that as you start your business. So getting involved with either service clubs or whatever charity organizations. But you want to do it for the right reasons. A lot of people do it for perhaps networking or to get involved, maybe to help stimulate their business, but that's not going to really motivate you. I think what's going to really drive you is being really, truly wanting to be involved with those organizations. And then it's easy. It doesn't feel like volunteer work, or it doesn't feel like anything else. It feels like part of your job. I think as you kind of grow in your business and as time permits, you probably find yourself doing more of that. And I see a lot of business people where their full-time job is involved in social. So they've got their employees running their company. You know, it kind of runs itself for the most part. They're steering it, but most of their time is really in networking with the public and in community involvement and everything else. So to me, that's probably the most important thing. The earlier you start, the better it is. If you take a small little snowball and you start rolling it, it grows bigger and bigger, and all you need is time on your side. You know, if you stay the course, I talked to kind of some other people that I know well that have done really well for themselves, and I asked, you know, they kind of read some of the points that I made here, and they some of their lines was, you know, everybody's got their own philosophies. Everybody likes to dive in because they love this kind of stuff. But, you know, don't try and get rich overnight, this one friend of mine said. And the winners are often those who stick to their game plan and don't attempt to take shortcuts. This is one thing that I think is very, very important and makes or breaks people. Only do business with people who you share your personal values with. So all those peg words that you're used to hearing: integrity, honesty, modesty, you know, personal accountability, hard work. All those peg words are so true. I mean, it sounds like something that your parents tries to teach you and you don't pay attention to, but at the end of the day, that's really what gets you there. If you have a partner, they say a lot of partnerships, you know, don't really, people hesitate to get into partnerships. And the only hesitation with partnerships, if your partner's with someone who doesn't have integrity. If both of you have integrity, you might have your differences, and you might even be growing in different directions. You can figure that stuff out quite easily. I've seen partnerships dissolve, but not that they dissolve because people don't necessarily get along. They just have they're growing in different directions, or they're just growing apart for legitimate reasons. And it's not that anybody's right or wrong on it. So even though the partnership got dissolved, it doesn't mean the partnership wasn't successful. It was perhaps successful as far as it lasted, and it was just time for both parties to move on. So I enjoy partnerships because it's an opportunity to work with other people, share ideas, share thoughts. If you think you can figure things out on your own, you know, all the best to you. I don't know anybody who has. You know, you might have people who have been in business completely on their own, but they're surrounded by people giving them advice, or whether it be their lawyer, their accountant, peers, or whatever the case is. You need to work well with other people, and the better you can work with other people, in my opinion, the more successful you're going to be. Again, that may or may not apply, I don't know, but that's my philosophy. I like this one little line that this friend of mine, I'd rather be lucky than smart. Oh, sure, go buy a lottery ticket, win 10 million bucks, and it's all done. But often good luck comes to those who create the preconditions for it. Ditto with bad luck. So in other words, people say, well, that guy got lucky. You know, he got a Tim Hortons and they do nothing but print money, or whatever the case is. Well, there's a lot of people who had them in the 90s and had to stick it through and sell one coffee at a time and work hard to make it work. And then all of a sudden that business took off. Well, were they there at the right time, right place, or right time? Well, they stuck it out. The preconditions, they've set it out themselves. So were they lucky? Well, sure they were, I guess, but they made their own luck as far as I'm concerned. And I think you can go on and on with those examples. So just to suggest that somebody was lucky because they're in the right industry or whatever the case is, well, they chose that industry. And you know, you want to pick an industry or a business that you know something is in demand. You might not hit the timing perfectly, but if you kind of stick it through and you believe in what you're doing, then you're just kind of, as you wait it out, timing is going to come on your side. So surround yourself by good people. I might be duplicating myself here a bit. There's people around you that can help you become successful. Use them and treat them fair. Whenever I negotiate any kind of deal, I'm never interested in trying to negotiate the absolute best deal that I can. I'm interested in a fair deal for both sides. And my goal is for the deal to be win-win. If it's not win-win, then I'm not interested either. If it's not if it's not a win scenario for the person I'm trying to do business with, then I don't feel good about it. You know, I want to win. Now, at the same time, I also want it fair for myself. So it's easy, I find, for me to negotiate up when I don't believe that it's fair for myself. And I'll be very transparent with the guy. I said, I don't think this is fair because of this reason. And so I don't like going in there and trying to outsmart the other person. I like to go in there and be fully transparent, even if it makes myself vulnerable. Hopefully the guy will trust me more, and it's more and he's more comfortable to do business with me. And I think in the long run, that will work for you. Yeah.
You talked earlier about bad or good luck and bad luck. Were there any risks that you faced that made you second guess any ventures that you were thinking of?
Almost everyone. When I started, I mean, that first fourplex there, I'm on Central Creek Drive in the West End, right? The only thing I had going for me was they were brand new. So I had a good product to offer somebody. But the market was bad and had a lot of turnover, not because I didn't have the right product, just because people were moving out to, some of the units were basement units. Basement unit's a basement unit. People are there temporarily. They're just there until their house is done or something like that, or they're in transit. And I was outside of my comfort zone. I just got into business, so that was probably the most uncomfortable time was when I first started. And I certainly second guessed myself when we had 9 fourplexes that we were trying to keep full, and I was making 24 grand a year as backup. So, I think as you go on, then you get a little bit more comfortable because you're used to, what to expect. So when I first started, I didn't know what to expect. Every year I started seeing kind of the pattern in that, okay, April, May, people start moving around, and so I got used to that and whatever else. The hotel was a big animal. At the time, it was the biggest project that we took on, and we shut that thing down, and we had no revenue coming in. So I was second guessing myself there for a little while. We had this is probably a good example where if I was by myself, I'd have nobody to kind of talk through it with or support me and whatever else. There was 4 of us, and we stuck together and we worked. We made it work. And the 4 of us I think the success was the 4 of us being together. Not that each one of us couldn't do it on our own, but it was a lot more comfortable with the 4 of us. Yeah.
Joe, you talk about integrity, you talk about relations. Thinking back all these years, going back to the 90s when you started, you have different nuances here from business startups in the audience. And they're nervous, they're scared, and you alluded to that when you started off. If you had to think back now, would you do anything different? Did you do something, not to say that it was wrong at the time because you're jumping into whatever you can, but if you had to do something different, and advice to give the people here that are in that situation that should I or shouldn't I, what would you do and what would you do different?
Yeah. Good question. Hindsight's 20/20. So I've made mistakes all along the way, but you don't know that they're mistakes until after the fact. So sure, I go back and fix all that kind of stuff, but that's based on with the information I had at the time. It's kind of hard to say. I don't know, to be honest. I don't regret a whole lot, to be honest. I mean, I think I was pretty strong-minded in terms of what I wanted to do, the one peg word that I like to use is perseverance. I just persevered through. The one saying there, what do you do when you're going through hell? Keep going. So there was a lot of times when I second guessed myself, I just kept going. I never for an instant thought of just standing still and giving up. I just kind of kept going. I might have been limping, because I was stressed or whatever the case is. but I just kind of kept pushing forward. So, so yeah, I don't know.
Whatever you believe in, just
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to think of it, well, if you think you made a mistake, some people say, well, they won't take a loss, for example. Sometimes it's better maybe to take the loss and move on, because it's either take a loss or take a bigger loss by sticking it through. So, if you make that decision pragmatically, then sometimes the right answer is taking the hit. So I'm not afraid to take a hit if that makes most sense at the time. I'm not going to throw good money after bad, as they say. So I'm not proud. I'm just, I make mistakes, and if somebody else has a smarter idea than me, I want the smart idea. I don't want my idea. I want the best idea. So you can always tweak the decisions you made. If you don't make mistakes, then you're probably, I don't know. I mean, if it's easy, now everybody's going to do it. So you're probably not in the right thing. Yeah. So, and for the most part, I think right from high school, I remember people telling me, you should go out of town, get the experience of going out of town. I would have made the same. Lake State was good for me. Did the trick. I was able to finish 2 years ahead of time. I had money in the bank when I graduated. My friends had debt. I was a laborer, making $19.40 an hour as a student, saving almost every penny of it. It would have been pretty hard to do if I took everybody's advice to go to town and party and whatever it is you do when you go out of town. I just partied in town.
I was just wondering, do you think that your family background and the people in your family were the driving force, that gave you the driving force, the ability or the desire to keep pushing forward and do your own thing?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I would say, I mean, in particular, I remember in high school, my father was a bricklayer and he had a masonry business. And so I wanted to kind of, I was entrepreneurial in high school. And I just kind of wanted to follow in his footsteps, more or less. And I remember I was in the garage with him, well, how do I go about, what do I do? What should I go to school for? And he said, I think you should become a bookkeeper. You go to school for bookkeeping, and in a strong Italian accent. So I went into accounting. But I just kind of followed his work ethic. My parents came from Italy, as many other stories, with nothing. And so it was good growing up in that, because, we grew up in a decent subdivision and everything else, but we grew up knowing the value of the dollar. When I worked as a laborer, I hated it. It was hard work. My back was shot by the time I was 19, 20 years old. And so I wouldn't foolishly spend it because I worked so hard for it. And so I saved it and I wanted to grow that, So that work ethic and all those values that I had mentioned earlier, I would say I learned from my family. I would say in particular my father. My brother Dave was just as driven and still is to this day as I am. And so together we had the same kind of ambition. So without my brother Dave, I think it would have been a lot tougher for me to start. If I would have been able to start, he was in the construction business and I wasn't, and I didn't know even how to go about it. So, it would have been interesting to see. We both, I think, worked very well together. I think and even now, with my background, administration, that's kind of the part that he doesn't like or enjoy or whatever else, and I've got that covered, and he just, so that works really well. And my wife, she came down to the bank with me when the banks were turning me down, and so she put her signature on the line. Well, when we weren't even married yet. So, and she is not entrepreneurial, and she could care less about business or anything else. She wants me to work 9 to 5. But she knows this is what I want, and so she supports it. Without that support, I don't know how you're going to do it. If you had somebody who wasn't supportive, so even though it's not something that she wants, she knows it's something that I want, and so she supports it. So, yeah, without family, I don't know how I probably wouldn't even be interested. If it wasn't for my family, what am I doing it for? Or you take it to a certain point, and then I wouldn't care anymore, and I moved to Florida in the wintertime, and so yeah, my family is what drives me. Yeah, 100%.
Joe, you talk a lot about taking risks. You took a lot of risks when you were younger to get started. Are there any other qualities you see in entrepreneurs? Sort of across
Yeah, the only thing, maybe I want to clarify the, risk. Risk, I call, it's calculated risk. When you're taking that risk, I mean, there's always risk and there's factors that you can't control. But for the most time, you're pretty sure you can make it through, subject to the sky falling down or subject to SR Steel closing tomorrow. There's going to be these significant factors that might fall down that you have no control over. That would be devastating to any, or interest rates go to 22% like in the early 80s. Those things can happen to the smartest of us, and there's nothing we can do. But for the most part, if you take kind of calculated risks, something that you're comfortable with, whenever I looked at something, I always thought in my mind that my worst case scenario was going to be a break-even scenario. And if I was 99.5% comfortable that my worst case scenario was break-even, then I'm doing it. And then I stopped paying attention to what everybody around me is saying, because most people don't want any risk, and most people aren't entrepreneurial, perhaps. And then, so they're not prepared to take that kind of risk. But when I get my comfort level and I feel good about it, then that's when I stop listening to everybody else, and then I go forward. Because like I said, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. So you get to a point where, okay, now I'm on my own, I've listened to everybody, I've taken their advice, and now it's time for you to make your decision and then jump forward. So, what was the second part of your question?
if there's other attributes of entrepreneurs that you see in some of your colleagues.
Hard work, all that kind of stuff. Again, all those peg words in terms of integrity, common sense. I wouldn't suggest that you need to be overly intelligent. Look at me, I just think you need to have, I think common sense is important though. I know a lot of people, they get intimidated if they don't have enough education, all that kind of stuff. I would say most entrepreneurs don't. I mean, and I'm sure you've all heard of the story, Bill Gates is a Harvard dropout or whatever the case is. So education is a tool. I mean, that's really all it is. It's a good tool, and in my case, it was a very important tool, because without my degree and without my CA designation, I couldn't have a practice, which helps me invest and do things that I want to do. You need that seed money, and it also gives me that, in my case, that administrative background to do the property management and all that kind of stuff. So it's been a great tool, But if you don't know how to use a tool, or if you're not driven, it's just like anybody else. You can put a hammer in anybody's hand, but then what do you do with it when you have it?
Joe, you talk about the administration side, so, I see a lot of companies from a business development perspective, they know how to get their hands dirty, do what they need to do. But they always, not that they forget or don't pay attention to the administration or the financial. What advice can you give them? Because there's so many out there. Who's good, who's bad, what do you look for in that? So that part of the business, they can have the assurances that it's taken care of while they're doing what they do best on getting their hands dirty.
That's a great question, because I've seen a lot of employees who people think are the company, and without them, the business is nothing. And then I've seen those people go out on their own and fail. You can have the skill set to do your job and everything else, but then what I call the back end of the business, and it's only a small component of the entire business, but it's still a component that you absolutely need to have. You could be a great salesperson, you can be a good technical person, all that kind of stuff. Without that, let's call it administrative backbone, without that ability to kind of keep the banks happy and keep all your lifelines going and whatever else, then the business fails. You can have the greatest the greatest business this planet has ever seen. You need sometimes that staying power to see yourself to success. So a lot of times you have a great product, but the timing's off just a little bit. And then, but you don't know how to do your payroll and your source and whatever else, and your company gets buried because you don't keep up with the rent and whatever other costs drag you down, and you're not around when things turn around and things are good. So what do you do about it? You fill the void somehow. So you can fill the void by having a partner who has that strength, or hiring the right people that have those strengths, and you got to trust those people. The most important thing, doesn't matter how good or smart those people are, whether they're your partner or employee, if you can't trust them, then you're not going to empower them to do their job. And if you don't empower them to do their job, then I think there's a decent chance that you still fail, even with the right people in place, because you're not leaning on them, and you're not utilizing the right people.
Can you expand on that and talk a little bit about your experience when you had to make your first hire and realize you're going to be responsible for somebody's livelihood as an entrepreneur, and then talk about being an employer in the community, what it means to you personally?
That's a good question, and it's a tough one, because you're balancing keeping your company healthy to someone's personal situation, you know. So I always recognize the fact that you know, somebody's working for me, and perhaps that salary is putting food on their table. But at the same time, you know, you have to, if you keep trying to be Santa Claus all the time and try to save the world, then your business will just fail, and then you're not helping anybody in the long run. So it's certainly a balancing act, and no question there, and it's probably the toughest part of what I do. But there's times you have to make tough decisions, and you have to do it. You know, it's really that simple. So there's been situations where you know, I've had some situations where I was aware of some personal circumstances that it would be, you know, terrible timing if someone lost their job, and so I tried to keep them on for as long as I could, and give them enough notice so that they can look at other options, stuff like that. But even that's tough to do, because you have to make sure that that person is still willing to kind of work for you, and not necessarily, you know, sabotage, or, you know, they don't become disgruntled. So it's a balancing act, and it's a responsibility. You've got a lot of responsibility. You're responsible for people's income. You know, I think a lot of these people could move on. The good ones, they always figure it out. But nonetheless, it's you know, you're dealing with their personal lives and stuff like that. So it's a lot of responsibility.
How many times have you been the last person on the payroll?
What's that?
How many times have you been the last person on the payroll?
How many times have I been?
The last person on the payroll.
Yeah.
Right? Typical entrepreneur, last on the payroll.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I've had like I'm surrounded by tons of good people, so I count my blessings every day as far as that goes. You know, that my people are my business, and if it weren't for them, then I really wouldn't have much of a business. It'd be a very scaled down version one, that's for sure. You know, so I think I try to I tell my people that how much I appreciate them, and I think they know that, and I think that's important. You know, if they know that, that's worth to them more than a lot of other things, including salary. You know, if you don't treat people with respect, doesn't matter how much you pay them, they're not going to want to work for you. You know, I think respect is a huge thing. I remember reading some HR book, and I think wage was number 7 on the priority list. You know, I think number 1, like something like respect or whatever else, or, you know, advancement, all those kind of things. But yeah, financial salary was number 7. I remember that.
Joe, you've talked about the administrative side, but what about the entrepreneurs that have no, like you have the advantage of having an accounting background. What kind of advice would you give to those that don't?
Hire a good accounting firm.
There's a plug, Joe.
Yeah. No, all joking aside, you either have to hire that person. If you might have a person that can do it on a part-time basis in your business. A lot of that's a pretty typical scenario, and then you can lean on your external accountant for whatever else you need. One area that my accounting firm that we were really trying to pursue with growth is going into businesses and filling those voids. And so a lot of our growth is in controllership type work, what I call bookkeeping, some of it glorified bookkeeping, which is we'll call controllership, but glorified bookkeeping. Some of them, we've had people, they've got rid of their entire, their accounting staff, and they've reallocated into other areas of their business or whatever, and subbed out their entire accounting department. So every business is different. The size of your business matters too, on what's the better solution. But you don't be afraid. You have to have that covered off. And I'm not just saying that because that's what I do. It's important. I've seen some people incur penalties and interest that would more than pay for my fees because they try to do it on their own and they're just not good at it, and they kind of they don't want to pay for that professional service. But then it just catches up with you. So, but you got to balance that because the cost is important, right? It's an overhead cost, and so you want to make sure that you find the best solution that makes sense for your business and your size of a business. So, small business is a little bit tougher, but there's lots of options out there. Yeah.
Everything you just said happened to me.
Yeah.
Everything to a T. So don't skip out on accounting.
Yeah.
Or legal for that matter.
Yeah. No, I've seen a lot like source deduction. So the first thing they start missing is source and HST. Well, those are the last guys you want to upset because they just come in and they'll shut you down and they don't care about your job or anything like that. They've got a job to do and they don't even live in the same city as you, and they just their job is to collect. So, yeah, it's you want to do it right. There's just like anything else, right? You want to do it right. So.
Joe, along those lines, as an accountant, you probably have a lot of experience, obviously, reviewing financial statements, that kind of thing. Do you have any tips for entrepreneurs in terms of what are the most important financial metrics? Like they talk about cash flow is king, keep the business going, that kind of thing. Any advice there?
Cash flow is king. Cash is king. Yeah. I mean, if you want to sum it up, I mean, every business is so different, right? Whether you're being retail or construction or whatever the case is, as a business grows and is profitable, cash flow is king. It's, you could be making good money and stuff like that, but you want to have a good relationship with your bank in those situations, and especially as you grow, because as you grow, the more cash you need. You would think that you've got more cash. Most of the time, or a lot of times, you have less cash because you're growing your business. So a lot of people say, well, whatever, I made all this money, but where is it? And at the end of the year, then they owe a huge amount in taxes. And most people say, well, if I made your kind of money, I'd love to pay your kind of taxes. Well, yeah, well, not if you don't have the cash to pay it. And so again, it's really being on top of business, knowing your costs and knowing. Some people have grown too fast. I'm sure you've heard that a lot, right? And the opportunities are there, and it's just so tempting to keep going because there's profit to be had. But a lot of business could only grow so fast because the banks will only keep up with them so much, or their own capital that they have. So you have to take things in stride, and then seek advice. And in areas where you're not sure or whatever, that's when you kind of sit down and. People say, how much should I lean on my accountant and stuff? I always say, you kind of want to know as much as you can on your own, because you're working the business, especially as a small entrepreneur. I think if you don't know your costs on your own in the everyday, like if you have to keep looking, for example, to your accountant all the time, then you don't know your business. So where the accountant maybe can come into play is kind of helping you, setting up some templates and some tools and stuff like that help you in managing your business, but you need to learn how to use those tools on your own, I think, as much as possible. And again, every business is a bit different, so I'm really saying this in general terms, but you want to really know your own day-to-day. That's why you're an entrepreneur. You're the one who knows it the best, more so than your accountant, I would say.
You said you're always obviously driven and entrepreneur, but you said the first 3 years were a little rough. But was there any project or turning point where you kind of that kind of really boosted your confidence, maybe took
Yeah.
you to the next level, and you said, hey, like, I think
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing here?
If I had a TSN turning point, I would say it was in 1999. We were doing a subdivision, which was the most riskiest thing I've done, because there might not be any cash flow. Well, at least when you're doing a rental, you don't know how much is coming in necessarily, but you got income coming in, right? A subdivision could be everything going out and nothing coming in. So it was pretty. It was a bit of a jump for me at the time, and it went well almost from the outset, or well enough that it just self-sustained itself right away. And in '99, interest rates started dropping, and then I restructured some stuff, and I had 3 years of equity, that I was able to secure a line, which gave me breathing room, and so I kind of consider that kind of not that it was a huge thing, it wasn't overly huge. I mean, even the subdivision itself, it was 26 lots, but I had a couple partners and stuff like that. It was, big enough, but it was just, that was kind of my time going forward where, I felt like, I had some substance to me finally. Whereas the first 3 years, I felt like I was on shaky ground all the time, that I could easily be knocked off, if things turned against me in the slightest. But from '99 on, I started feeling more comfortable. I was still always nervous with just like anything else. I was always very careful with anything I did, but yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about your experience rebranding your hotel in Quattro?
Sure.
Is that a big risk or calculated risk, and what was the process of rebranding the whole thing?
I would say that decision took us about a year to make. One of my partners and the GM from the hotel, we have lunch together every day. So my office is in the hotel. And then we'd always be small talk and whatever it is, and talking about business and whatever else, and all the things that we like to talk about. And so we were back and forth with different options. In the Comfort Suites brand, in our case, we felt we were misbranded because we were a conference center. Comfort Suites is your typical cookie cutter, 3-story, 4-story, limited service hotel. We were more of a full service conference center. If you were to ask me, where are you getting married? I'm getting married at the Comfort Suites. Didn't really have a nice ring to it. The Quattro restaurant built a bit of a name for itself, so that branding was already kind of in place. So we felt good that we could maybe take that and apply to the whole property, and we just kind of went back and forth. Some of the discussions we had were looking at other brands because the Comfort Suites we didn't feel matched us properly. We looked at going completely independent, but long story short, we thought that the best of both worlds is what we did, and that's having our own kind of our own brand, but still the backing of a franchise. And so none of our back end had to change with our switch. So even our existing customers who are on a Choice Rewards point system, the back end reservations, nothing had to change at all. We took one sign down and we put up our own sign. And so we became part of Choice's Ascend collection, which is kind of what they consider their boutique type hotels, and the market that where we want to position ourselves with a touch of luxury is how we brand ourselves, and then we did some basic improvements over and above. The major improvement was in 2010, which was a complete gut. We shut the hotel down, took down walls. It was structural changes, and then in 2015, a lot of it was mostly cosmetic stuff, like the paint, the sign, all that kind of stuff. And I remember with the sign, I was working with the one sales guy, and I told him, I'm kind of envisioning this kind of New York scaffolding type of sign, like in the 30s and 40s. And his first depiction back to me was exactly what I was thinking about, and that was our sign. The colors, that was my GM who kind of picked the colors on the paint and stuff like that, and he executed for the most part. But between my one partner, John Martell, and myself, we kind of more or less laid out the vision, and we worked with him on a daily basis, and we discussed that vision daily. And then Mike, our GM, executed. And I mean, he's another example of a guy. He was a former director at the Royal York down in downtown Toronto, and he came with us, and he usually sticks around for 2 years, and then he's gone. And that's all he promised me when we hired him. It was 2 years, and he was gone, and he's going on year 4, and he has intentions of retiring there. He goes, he just enjoys working with us. He doesn't, the hotels that he's used to working at have all become bureaucracies to him, whereas we're kind of a down-to-earth kind of guy. We have lunch together every day. We talk about stuff, and we do things. We make decisions on a dime type thing, and so we've become somewhat friends. So it's those kind of guys that I'm blessed to have around me that continue to drive my business. So
let's talk a little bit on the funding side. Talk about Quattro. You got some NHFC funding to do probably one of the best interactive type boardrooms that are out there in Sault Ste. And stuff. You got the younger folks, the younger companies, I guess, starting off and whatnot. What can you tell them a little bit about funding? Because when you started off, I got to go to the bank. The funding models weren't there as they are today. And usually I find that businesses say, well, you know what, I'm going to apply now because he got funding, he got funding, I'm owed funding too. What would you tell this group here in terms of, from a funding perspective? Do you, don't you? If it's a need, go for it. Maybe share a little bit of your experience from the hotel side of things, where you got some funding, and share that experience maybe.
Well, any funding was more or less an afterthought. I mean, the project is going to work or not on its own merit, and a lot of grants that are in place, they're there to help you to ensure success. Increase your or decrease your risk and whatever else. So that was a somewhat of a small component because there's only so much. I mean, the renovation that we did and everything else, it was a $10 million renovation. So any funding we got was somewhat of an insignificant component of that. But everything helps. There's no question. It was those programs I think are, it was good to have, and not available. If we had to do that today, it wouldn't be available. We wouldn't qualify. So sometimes timing is on your side. From there, it's just hotels aren't the easiest thing to finance. They're considered high risk for the banks. A lot of times the banks will look at your industry and they don't care how much money. You could be Donald Trump and they just don't want to do hotels. So you can have a strong relationship with them, but their portfolio in Canada is full. And so you come up against those kind of roadblocks sometimes. So your options become limited, So you've got to lay the groundwork before you go ahead with everything. So have all your ducks in order and then go. But the problem with that is, especially with a renovation, your budget. Well, our budget got blown out of the water a few times, So it wasn't fun. I'll be honest with you. It was a tough conversion. It was a tough thing to do. We made mistakes doing it too, but those mistakes kind of worked out. If we kind of joke, if we were too smart, we wouldn't have done a lot of the stuff. But it all ended up working out. So we're glad that we weren't too smart. But it's just we kind of we grind it. You grind it through, head down. What do you do when you're going through hell? You keep going, and that's what we did. If we didn't have the support of working together, that was a huge part of it as far as I'm concerned. And I think each of the partners will say the same thing. So that was that was probably the biggest single undertaking that I've done so far. And I wouldn't want to really do it again, to be honest with you. Mind you, it probably becomes easier the second time around, mind you, but and you do become a little bit smarter. But it was, but I'm glad that it's all done, And it's done and it's working well and it's come along and we've got a good asset, I think. that we can go forward with.
And I'll just add a little bit about maybe knowing your options when you're starting off. It would be extremely
Yeah.
important in terms of grant financing or
Yeah,
bank financing.
yeah,
So knowing your options would be up to you to see what's out there.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if you don't know, then that's where you consult your whoever, accountant or business advisor, whoever, that works with that kind of stuff all the time, right? I think that's important. So, yeah. So it was great. In hindsight, I'm glad I did it. It was a great experience, but I'm also glad it's over.
Coming back to Mike, why don't you talk about sort of the empowerment and with employees and not so much micromanagement, because I see that Mike tells you what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
He's running the hotel and
Yeah.
you let him do his thing, which is probably why he's staying there so long.
Yeah, yeah.
'Cause he's running it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, so my GM, Mike, he's got the keys to the place. There's no question. He runs a thing. If somebody asks me for something, I go to him. And so if I'm asked for sponsorship or whatever the case is, or whatever, I go through Mike. And if I see something I don't like, I go through Mike, because a lot of I might take things out of context. And that's Mike's job, and he appreciates that fact. He's been doing minor capital stuff, and I find out about it after the fact. But that's because we trust each other, and he won't even tell me until I see something new, and then and I'll ask him how much it cost me. And so yeah, we certainly joke about that. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, if he didn't have that, and you're like this on him, I don't think he would enjoy it or whatever. And if you micromanage the guy, well then not that there's necessarily anything wrong with micromanaging, but are you micromanaging because you don't trust the guy, or are you micromanaging because you don't trust his integrity, you don't trust his skill set, or what is it? He's running the show. He knows more in hospitality. He was a director at a very prestigious hotel. I wasn't. I'm an accountant. And you don't even have to be smart to be an accountant, right, Brad?
No, not even.
So you have to do that. You have to, and it's better for me too, because I don't want to get involved. Because if I was just engulfed in the day-to-day operations, I wouldn't want to do anything else. So by being able to trust him and work with him and stuff like that, it frees me up to be able to want to do other things and continue growing, my own business, my own portfolio, and all that kind of stuff. So if you don't trust him, then get somebody that you trust, because then you'll. So, and there's different philosophies. I mean, my philosophy is different from certain others who want to be there on an absolute day-to-day basis, and that just doesn't work for me. So.
You said when you started there was a lot of uncertainty in the local economy, like with a lot.
And not much different than today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that a bit? Like, would you?
Well, okay. If I remember correctly, in '95, the residential vacancy rate was 10 to 15%. There were some areas of town that were 30%. And I was building brand new fourplexes. So, doesn't seem very smart, right? But I was building brand new, cost-effective, properties. The numbers worked, and so even though the average was 10-15%, mine was 2 or 3%, because I had new rentals and everything else. So that helped me ride through that time when things were really bad, because I was able to pull from and get more than my fair share of the market. And then in '99, interest rates dropped, so that was a huge help. And then by 2000, 2001, 2002, the market started improving. And then it's just, ever since, it's been pretty decent. I think it's softened in the past 2 or 3 years. Like, there was a period of, I would say 10 years, I didn't have to even put ads in the paper. Things more or less rented itself. That's not quite the case anymore. At least that's my own experience. So it's becoming a little bit more of a grind again. But Algoma Steel was going through restructuring in the 90s. People were leaving town, all that kind of stuff. So everybody thought I was crazy. And so if I listened to everybody, then probably wouldn't be here talking to you. You know, I'd be working as an accountant somewhere, I guess, and my wife would be happy. Happier. I think she's happy.
So what do you see as the entrepreneurial future here in Sault Ste?
Huh. You want the diplomatic answer to that, or you want? Yeah. Well, to me, I think right now, you know, diversification is important. I think there's some great opportunities still in the Sault. I think you just have to be sharper with those opportunities, though. The Sault's my home. My family's here. Where am I going? You know, I can't just pick up and start over somewhere else, type thing. You know, so for the most part, you know, I always talked about looking for real estate investment opportunities out of town, but the Sault's my backyard and it's what I know the best, you know, so it's easier said than done. Having said that, there are some opportunities, and, you know, through people that I know and working with those people in other markets, and I think that's how I'm going to try to do it. So strategically, I like to kind of diversify some of my interests out of the Sault for just to be geographically diversified. But having said that, I'm still ambitious to kind of do some projects, and I've got some ambitious plans that I'm working on as we speak that are significantly larger than even the hotel, that I think will work in the Sault, you know. So I think, but what's important are things like the city not bringing in these development charges and stuff like that that discourage investment. All those little things, we need everything we can on our side, because we're not Toronto, you know, and we're not these growing markets. So we have to do things differently. So, and just because other markets are doing things a certain way doesn't mean we should be as well. So we have to be different, and we have to be aggressive and whatever else. But there's still some good opportunities, and I'm looking forward to them. So.
What about places like this, John? I mean, you got an innovation center here, you got the tech, you got the hub.
Yeah. I think that's great, and kudos to people who are interested in. I'm a pretty traditional kind of guy. I say this is stones and mortar. I like bricks and mortar. I don't. I mean, food and beverage is the most challenging part of the hotel business, for example, but it's a necessary part of the hotel. It's not a business that I personally would be interested in, but I think it's awesome that there's people that are willing to do these kind of things. It's certainly something that's unique, and that's that I think is good for the Sault, and that's awesome. I mean, it's a great place, and you know, to be able to maintain historical buildings like this and use them like the way that's being used now, I think is awesome. You know, so even though I wouldn't necessarily be interested in being part of something like this, say as an investor or anything like that, I think it's awesome that other people are doing it, and it takes a true entrepreneur to do it, I think.
Joe, from the point of looking at the labor force, so you have people here, they're going to expand at some point in time. There are some areas in our labor force that there's really not many people there. I mean, I know that, you know, Jeff, you know, his company, you know, there's challenges to get talented people. Not to say that we don't have talented people in the community, because we have a lot of, you know, at one point in time, a lot of exodus of people leaving. So from your perspective, what advice can you give these folks as, you know, as their business grows, you got the labor function to contend with and the expertise, so how can they best go about to get the best people?
That's probably the toughest challenge we have, I think, for the most part. You know, no different than even my accounting practice. Finding good bookkeepers. A bookkeeper is a trade, as far as I'm concerned, and so it takes a certain person with a certain skill set to be good at it, and it's not easy. You know, it's in a public accounting firm, it's a high-paced environment. You're really grinding it every day, and there's a lot of volume of work. And you have to be good at it because you have to be efficient so that you can do things within a client's budget, because you're overhead to them. You're not necessarily, you're keeping their business, the back end going and everything else, but you're not a salesperson making them more money type thing. You're, for the most part, you're overhead. So I'm always sensitive to that, and when I'm trying to find solutions for clients, I want to work within a budget, and then we need to be good at what we can do so that we can do it in the right amount of hours so that we can make money as well. And that's the challenge. And I don't think it's any different than any other business. I look at my father, who's a bricklayer. Even back then, like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, he made his money because he was on the job and he was pushing production. He was a bricklayer himself. His challenge 20, 30, 40 years ago was finding good trades, and it's only worse now. So whether it's a trade or someone just good at helping you in your business, and whether it's a trade or not, yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge. And as you grow your business, and when you're a smaller business, you're doing a lot of that your own anyways, and you're probably the one doing it the best. You're very efficient at it. You're able to really pump out work most efficiently. And then as you grow, then the challenge is, okay, now I gotta make money off of people who don't necessarily have the same drive and skill set that I have. And good luck to you. That's what being in business is all about, But then, it's training and everything else. I like this one line, or I think it was a cartoon. The guy said, well, what if we train all of our employees and they just end up leaving? And then the boss looks down at him and he says, well, what if we don't train them and they stay? So, yeah, it's the joys of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what it is.
Any other questions for Joe?
Okay, well, I hope this was helpful.